Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku is a Saiyan Part 1, and because there's nothing to say, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we begin this what if the day Izuku's teacher asked what track did the class want to go into. And you may be wondering, why are we starting here? And that's because everything up until this point is the same, with Izuku being quirkless and Bakugou bullying him, so Izuku is still called Deku. And when the teacher asked, everyone in the class began to shout, saying that they wanted to become heroes. And hearing this, Bakugou got out of his seat and he began to shout, saying that he was the only one worthy of becoming a hero. And while Bakugou was in the middle of his rant, Izuku muttered that he would like to give the hero course a shot. And hearing this, Bakugou stopped for a couple of seconds. Then he slammed his hand on Izuku's desk and fired an explosion, and in fear Izuku jumped back, and he slammed himself against a wall. Then Bakugou told him he had no chance of becoming a hero, and he told him that he was worse than every other person in that room. So now we skip to the end of the day, and when class was over, Izuku was still in the classroom, writing down hero notes for the new hero, Mount Lady. But before Izuku could finish, Bakugou and his friends walked into the room, and they began to bully Izuku. And eventually Bakugou grabbed Izuku's notebook, and he exploded it, and right afterward he threw it out the window. And shortly after that, the group left the room, leaving Izuku alone. And after some time, Izuku went to go look for his notebook, and eventually he was able to find it in a pond with some fish sucking on it. And after Izuku dried up the notebook, he began to walk home, and because he wanted to go home as fast as possible, he decided to take a shortcut home. And eventually he got under a bridge, and while he was under the bridge, he noticed the sewer grate begin to shake, and after a couple of shakes, a pile of sludge jumped out of the sewers. And when the sludge saw Izuku, it ran at him, and before Izuku could react, the sludge villain already got to him, and the sludge villain began to push himself into Izuku's body, trying to take it over. But before Izuku could suffocate, something grabbed onto Izuku, and a second later, Izuku wasn't under the bridge anymore, and most of the sludge villain was gone, with some of him still in Izuku's mouth. And after Izuku was able to cough out what he needed to, he was actually able to identify where he was, which was on top of a building a couple of buildings away. And while Izuku was trying to figure out what just happened, a person teleported in front of Izuku. And seeing this, Izuku got scared for a second, but when he calmed down, he was actually able to look at the person, who was a tall male with black spiky hair wearing an orange gi. Izuku then thanked the person who accepted it, and he began to walk away. But before he got too far, Izuku asked the guy who he was, and if he was some type of hero. And in response, he was told that the guy's name was Goku, and that he was actually not from this universe, and he got teleported here after he fought a powerful opponent. And by the end of the story, he told him it would only take him a couple of days to get back at home at most. And Izuku, hearing all this, then asked how did he get so strong, and in response, Goku told him that he was a Saiyan, a humanoid alien who had special abilities, who were natural-born warriors. But he also told Izuku that he gained much more power from training, which could power up just about anyone as long as they were willing to work hard. And hearing this, Izuku's eyes lit up, and he asked if he could train him, and after some thought, Goku gave him the okay, and he told him to meet him in the nearby plains the next free day he had. And after he said that, Goku teleported away, and shortly after that, Izuku went back home. So now we skip to the next free day Izuku had, and when Izuku got to the plains, Goku was inside a tent eating some food he had, and when he noticed Izuku, he hurried up his pace, and when he was done eating, he got up and he told Izuku that it was time for him to train, and the first thing Izuku was told to do was plow the plain until he made a giant farm with only his hand, and having no other choice, Izuku began to plow. And when it was around noon, Izuku had plowed so much, there was now 500 acres of plowed ground, and by this point, Izuku was tired from doing all this work. But after 30 minutes, Goku told Izuku that it was time for him to do his next thing, which was to run around the farm 10 times, and when it was around 2, Izuku finished. And seeing that Izuku was done, Goku told Izuku to come into his tent to rest, and while Izuku was on his break, he asked Goku why did he have to go through all of this manual labor instead of normal training. And hearing this, Goku told him that was how he trained, and that's how he got started, and how even when he was a kid, he was strong enough to fight the toughest fighters from his planet. And hearing this, Izuku decided to give it his all, because if this was all it took, he felt like it was worth a try. And after the break, Izuku was teleported to a beach, where there was trash everywhere. And when they got there, Goku told him that he had to swim across the entire side of the beach, and after a couple more hours, Izuku was able to complete it. And after he did this, he was told that he was done for the day, and this type of training went on for months, with every week, Goku would give Izuku a weight to make the training even harder. And while the months were going by, Goku would tell Izuku about his home world, while Izuku told him about his world. And with this, Goku learned about UA and about the upcoming entrance exams. And the week before the exams, Izuku was at a power level of around 200, and he can now carry arm and leg weights that have a weight of around 50 pounds without any problems. So without any weights, he's around 5% of one for all. And on the day of the exams, Goku told Izuku to meet him at the regular spot. And when Izuku got there, it was around 4 hours before the exams. And when Izuku went into Goku's tent, he saw 7 orange balls, with different amount of stars in each one. And seeing them, Izuku asked Goku what they were, and Goku in response Shenron said that they were his farewell gifts, because from this day on, he will have to do the training on his own, since he needs to go back home. And after some talking, Goku began to place the orange balls in a circle, and when they were ready, Goku began to challenge saying, "Eternal Dragon, by your name, I summon you forth, Shenron." And when he was done, the balls began to light up, and after a couple of seconds, the balls shoot out a beam of light into the sky. And after it reaches the cloud, the light turns into a giant green dragon. And at first Izuku was shocked, since he wasn't exactly expecting this, but after some time Izuku calmed down. And when the dragon was fully formed, he shouted his name with Shenron, and he will grant them a maximum of 3 wishes. And hearing this, Izuku looked at Goku, and when Izuku got his approval via a nod, Izuku shouted his wish, which was, "I wish I was a Saiyan, just like Goku." And hearing this, Shenron said, "Wish granted." And when he said this, a beam of light came from Shenron's eyes, which hit Izuku head on, and after a couple of seconds he stopped. And when Izuku opened his eyes, he saw that he was normal, except for the fact that he now has a long brown tail, and he could feel that he was stronger than he was before, so now he's at 1 for all 7% without any weights. Goku then asked Izuku if he wanted anything else, and in response, Izuku just shook his head, and he told him that he got the only thing he wanted. And hearing this, Goku just shrugged his shoulders, and he told Shenron that they were done. And hearing this, Shenron turned back into light, and he went back into the balls, then raised into the air, and they turned to stone, and they were about to separate and spread across the world, but before they could get too far, Goku ran into all of them, and he caught them in midair, and he put them into a bag. And after Goku took down his tent, he began to say goodbye to Izuku, telling him he will do great, and that he will become a good hero. But before Izuku left, Goku remembered something his son gave him, which was a book, and inside there was diagrams and words, telling Izuku about Ki, and how to master it, and how to do special things like doubling his power, or shooting out energy beams. And at the end of the book, there was a special section for Saiyans, saying that if they can harness their power enough, or feel enough emotions, they can change forms, which allows them to gain even more power. And after Izuku was done skimming, he had around 2 hours before the exams, so seeing that he needed to leave, he began to thank Goku even more, and after a couple of seconds, Goku put his fingers to his head and he teleported away, along with all of his things. And seeing that he was gone, Izuku began to run back to the city to get ready for the exams. So now we skip to when Izuku gets to the front gates of UA, and he is currently in a school uniform, except he is currently wearing both his arm and leg weights, and he had his tail hidden under his clothes, since he still hasn't found a way to explain how he now has a tail. And while Izuku was walking to the exam hall, he tripped on a rock, and seeing this, he was going to put his hands down to catch himself, but before he could hit the ground, he stopped in midair. And seeing this, Izuku was confused, so he began to look around, and when he looked behind him, he saw a girl holding onto his bag, and after she put him back onto his feet, she gave him weight again. And after some talking, she leaves to go to the exam hall, and shortly after she does, Izuku goes to the exam hall as well. And when the exam hall got filled, President Mike told all the examinees the events that will happen, and what the rules are for each event. So now we skip a couple of hours, and the first part of the entrance exams were done, and all the examinees that passed the first phase were waiting outside the exam area. And after some time waiting, President Mike appeared on top of a tower, and he shouted that the test had started, since in real life there are no countdowns. And the second he said this, the gate of the exam area opened up, and seeing this, everyone began to run into the exam area, Izuku included, with him running at the same speed as the guy who asked a lot of questions during the explanation of the exams. And when Izuku met his first robot, Izuku kicked it as hard as he could, destroying it. And Izuku kept doing this with every robot he saw, and by around the end of the test, Izuku had 61 robot points. But when there was 1 minute left, the examiners released a 0-pointer, and seeing this, everyone began to run away, Izuku included. But before he got too far, Izuku heard someone yell from pain, and when he looked back, he saw the girl that stopped him from falling earlier, but now she had her leg trapped under some rubble, and the 0-pointer was about to crush her. So Izuku then ran back, and when he got to her, he threw all the rubble off of her one at a time, and after around 30 seconds, Izuku was able to get all the rubble off of her, and when it was all gone, Izuku helped the girl to her feet, and when she was standing, he asked if she could walk. And hearing this, the girl said she was fine, but she was a bit hurt, and she began to limp walk away. But seeing that the robot was closing in on them, Izuku grabbed her and put her into his arms, and he began to run away. And when the minute was up, all the examinees began to hear an alarm ring out through the entire city, and they were told that the exams were now over. And after a thank you from the girl left. And shortly after that, Izuku left to go home as well. And a couple of days later, Izuku got a letter from UA, and when he opened it, he saw a video message from All Might, telling him he got 61 robot points, and he apparently got 16 points from rescuing the girl, making his total 77 points, making him tied for first place with an examinee by the name of Bakugou. And when All Might was done saying all of this, he told him that he had been accepted into UA, and he will be going into Class 1A. So now we skip to the first day of school, and by this point, Izuku showed his mom his tail, and afterward, they went to the doctors for testing, and after some tests, Izuku was labeled to have a quirk, called Prime Human. So currently, Izuku is standing outside the doors of Class 1A, and when Izuku opened the doors, the first people Izuku saw was Bakugou, and the guy with glasses, arguing over Bakugou having his legs on his desk. And not wanting to get involved, Izuku went to an empty desk, and after a couple of minutes, someone walked walked up to Izuku, and the person was a girl Izuku helped during the exams. So the two then gave each other their names, and after that they began to talk. But after a couple of minutes they noticed a sleeping bag in the doorway, and when the entire class noticed it, they shut up. And when they did, a man started to climb out of the sleeping bag, and when he got out, he said that it took them too long to get quiet, and he tells them that they will need to work on that. Then he tells them to get dressed in their PE clothes, and afterward meet him in the field outside. So now we skip to when everyone was at the field, and when Aizawa believed that everyone was there, he gave Bakugou a ball, and he told him to throw the ball as hard as he could, while using his quirk. And when Bakugou threw it, he used an explosion to fire the ball farther, and when the ball hit the ground, a number appeared on Aizawa's phone, telling him how far the ball went, and the number he showed the class was 705.2 meters. Then Aizawa told the class that they would be testing to see how practical their quirks are, and how skilled they are at using them. And when he was done explaining the test, he told them that whoever got last place will be expelled, since he nor the school has time to train people who don't have potential. So the test then began, with it beginning with a 50-meter dash, and when it was Izuku's turn, Izuku ran to the other side as fast as he could, with a time of 3 seconds. And when it was time for the grip strength, Izuku got one of the highest scores, and after that was a long jump. And when it was Izuku's turn, Izuku ran as fast as he could, and when it was time, he jumped as high as he could, which allowed him to clear the sandbox. So finally it's time for the ball throw, and when it was Izuku's turn, he wanted to go all out for the final part of the test, so he put the ball to the ground, then he took off both his arm and leg weights, and after he did some stretching, he grabbed the ball, and when he was ready, he threw the ball as hard as he could, and when the ball hit the ground, the number that appeared on Aizawa's phone was 160 meters, and after saying this, Bakugou was confused, since he doesn't know how Izuku threw the ball, so he then ran at Izuku shouting. But before he could get to Izuku, a racer tied him up with his scarf, until he eventually calmed down. So now we skipped when Aizawa tallied up the scores, and even though Izuku didn't get the best score, Izuku was still in the higher part of the rankings. While in last place there was Mineta, who after the results were shown was taken to the principal's office, and the class never saw him again after that. So now we skipped to the next day, and when it was time for the hero course, instead of Aizawa walking into the room, it was All Might, in his Golden Age outfit. And after the class was done freaking out over All Might being in their classroom, All Might told them to put on their hero costumes and meet him on ground B. So now it's time for me to explain Izuku's hero costume. And since Izuku wanted his hero costume to look like Goku's, his costume is a gi that looks the exact same as Goku's, except instead of the normal blue, it's replaced with a dark green to fit his hair. And just like his normal clothes, he wears both his arm and leg band weights. So now we skip to when All Might sees everyone in their hero costumes, and he tells them that they will be doing heroes versus villains exercise. He then explains the rules, and at the end of the explanation, he puts everyone into groups of 2, with Izuku being paired with Ochako. He then put team letters into 2 boxes, and what he got from that was Izuku and Ochako's team for the heroes, and Bakugou and Ida's team for the villains. And when the matchup was revealed, the rest of the class goes to a room to watch the match, while Izuku and Ochako come up with a plan to get the bomb. And while they were coming up with a plan, Ida tried to make a plan with Bakugou, but when he tried, Bakugou just turned off his comm and he walked away, leaving Ida with the bomb. And when Izuku and Ochako got into the building, they ran until they were about to turn a corner, but before they turned, Bakugou jumped out from the corner and he fired an explosion. But before the explosion could hit them, Izuku pushed him and Ochako out of the way, with only part of his gi getting burned. Then Bakugou went to punch Izuku using a right hook, but when he threw the punch, Izuku was able to grab his arm and he used the momentum to fling Bakugou to the ground. And not expecting this, Bakugou was on the ground for a good couple of seconds. And while he was on the ground, Izuku shouted for Ochako to run, and he told her that he'll catch up later. And hearing this, she began to run, and by the time she was out of view, Bakugou was back on his feet. So, the two then began to fight, with Bakugou using his explosions to evade many of Izuku's attacks. But after some time, Izuku was able to kick Bakugou in the gut at full force, launching him a couple of feet. And when Bakugou got up, he pointed an arm at Izuku, and he moved his other arm toward the pin on the glove. And when he grabbed the pin, they hear on the speakers All Might telling Bakugou not to pull the pin. But Bakugou, hearing this, just began to laugh, and when he did, a massive explosion came out from his hands, which was big enough to fill the entire hallway they were standing in. And Izuku took the explosion head on, and when the smoke settled, Izuku was on the ground, and he seemed to be unconscious. And Izuku's clothes were partially burnt off, revealing part of Izuku's tail. And when Bakugou saw this, he walked over to Izuku in confusion. But before he was able to react, Izuku jumped back to his feet, and he punched Bakugou in the gut, making him keel over. Then Izuku got back to his feet and he jumped back. And when he was far enough, he took off both his arm and leg weights. And by the time Bakugou was able to get their back, Izuku took off all of his weights. Then Bakugou asked Izuku what the brown thing was wrapped around his leg. And hearing this, Izuku saw for a second to bluff. But after some thinking, he knew it wouldn't make a difference if he showed it. So Izuku then lifted his tail and he revealed it to Bakugou. And after Bakugou saw it, he began to shout at Izuku. And they began to fight again, with Izuku going for a punch while Bakugou went for a hook using his explosions. But since Bakugou wasn't expecting how fast Izuku was now that he took off his weights, Izuku was able to react first, and he hit Bakugou in the gut first. And while Bakugou was getting his breath back, Izuku ran past Bakugou and he ran towards the bomb. Since while they were fighting, Ochako on their comm told him where she and the bomb were located. And when Izuku got got to the room, he closed the door behind him, and he locked the door. And when Bakugou got to the door, he began to fire explosions, trying to break down the door. And while Bakugou was locked out, Izuku ran at Ida, and he began to fight him, with him having the upper hand. And by doing this, Izuku was able to distract Ida, just enough so he would forget about Ochako. And after a couple of seconds, Bakugou was able to break into the room, but by the time he entered, Ochako had already got to the bomb, and the second she made contact, All Might in the speakers announced that the hero team won, and a couple of minutes later, the two groups make it to the rest of the class. And this is where I'm going to leave the what if. I hope you enjoyed this part, and I hope you enjoy the series moving forward, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.